Thank you and welcome to this webinar which introduces XMPro version 6, which is, we feel, the next generation of intelligent business process management suites for intelligent business operations. And I'll explain as we go what we mean by that. And we actually sort of see it as iBOS, or our intelligent business operations suite. So XMPro going forward has grown from version 5. And the features that we'll be covering today are essentially what we call version 6 iBOS features. I'm not covering the basic BPM functionality. You can ask us or one of our partners to do a full presentation on the powerful features of XMPro that it's got currently in up to version 5, all the standard process management workflow. What we'll be focusing on today is really what makes version 6 the ideal platform for your intelligent business operations, and what does it mean in the first place. And to understand a little bit more of what intelligent business operations mean, I'd just like to touch very quickly on something that I picked up from Gartner at the Gartner IT Expo. And essentially what Janelle Hill was saying is that right now, where we are right now in business, there's newer technologies including social media, context-aware technologies, cloud environments, intelligent phones and devices, and all of these revolutionize the way that we work. So the way that we work is actually changing. And what Gartner is saying is enterprises have not yet empowered frontline employees to dynamically adjust their work in progress in response to the contextual opportunities or threats. And software has barely been applied to knowledge-centric work. Decision-making, risk assessments, pattern seeking, matching, group collaboration, all of those have been supported as point solutions up to now, but there's been nothing that brings it all together. And right now, with the leading economies that are increasingly dependent on service-based industries, it's becoming heavily dependent on knowledge work, information and knowledge workers, and these people are overwhelmed with data and choices. That's where we find ourselves and most of our customers at the moment. So what is intelligent business operations? To me, it's a state of business. It's not really something you can buy. It's not a methodology. It's really just a state of where the business is. It's almost like the BPM maturity curve, or any one of those maturity curves that takes you from a level 0 to a level 5. Intelligent business operation is a state in that process. And the way that we achieve that is by leveraging some of these things that are now available. And when we look at them, essentially there's three main components to what I see what gives you the state of intelligent business operations. And the first one is to be able to cater for knowledge style work. That means not everything can be structured. You need to have structured and unstructured processes in an organization. Secondly, those processes also need to be dynamic. So there's a convergence of unstructured. There's a requirement for dynamic, rules-based rather than flow-based, workflow-driven. There's a requirement of event-driven actions, and these event-driven actions are actually working towards a business goal, a KPI. One of your balanced scorecard KPIs or something like that. It includes predictive analytics. It's trying to understand what have we done in the past, looking at process mining and combining all of this to be able to dynamically change based on the context and the information that we have at that point in time. And something else that we are all aware of, but we've not been able to capture as part of the way that we do business, is to include those social conversations around the water cooler, and they're essentially in and around business transactions. What we mean by that: some conversations happens around business, how do we improve ourselves? Others happen around very specific transactions. So what are the benefits of intelligent business operations? The first one is really just better business decisions. What we don't want to do is actually force someone down a specific path when they have better contextual information when they know the context of a process. All that we want to do is give them as much information as we can at that point in time for them to make better decisions. So what we want to do is empower those knowledge workers, and we want them to act in a non-prescriptive way. If you take a factory style where everything works in a very prescriptive way and it's well worked out, and there's a JIT principle or anything like that, just in time, it's worked out to the finite element of what every work activity should take, how long it should take, what the next one is. Knowledge workers don't work like that. They don't want to work in a prescriptive way because they have contextual knowledge. But we still need to put that into some control framework. We can't just let them loose and do anything that they want to. And in XMPro version 6, we will show you, we'll demonstrate how we do some of these principles that we talk about here. A lot of companies have spent a lot of money on business intelligence tools, but what you want to do is make those business intelligence insights actionable. What do you do with the intel that you're gathering? How do you action it? How do you make sure things happen with it? How do you make sure people look forward and use it rather than just looking at a rear view mirror? Business intelligence dashboards can be almost like a rear view mirror. It shows you what happened. If you want to make it actionable, you need to take those business intelligence elements, those insights, and actually make them part of the process going forward, so that you can actually look forward instead of looking backwards. And then lastly, we will also, the other benefit that we get out of intelligent business operations is that we can actually improve the collaboration by harnessing the social interaction. Now, there's many ways of people socializing, and we're trying to capture some of them as part of the way that we work. We want to get better at getting work done, which is essentially what XMPro is all about. So just once again to emphasize the three elements of intelligent business operations that XMPro address is the ability to have unstructured processes, to have dynamic processes, and to have social processes. As I go through the presentation, we'll actually show you these three elements in terms of how we handle them in version 6. So to start off with unstructured processes, and as you'll recall, I said structured and unstructured processes are there to support a knowledge style work. Gartner's come out and said 80% of work is unstructured. So, and that is primarily in the knowledge worker space. So this is where people, salespeople, customer service, right down to financial office, chief marketing officer office, all of those processes are actually, there's a whole lot of unstructured work. In actual fact, we actually find that there's more of a hybrid model, that 20% of a process is structured and 80% of a process is unstructured. So it's not just that you can discretely say or quite easily define which processes are structured and which are unstructured. In many instances, you actually find a combination of those processes that are like that. And what you also find is when you look at real-world business processes, there are generally more exceptions than rules. That means if you're going to try and take a workflow-based approach where you draw the flow of how this thing will work, you're going to find that with all the exceptions, you're going to run out of paper. Unstructured processes say we have a collection, we have a container, and for a process, and we can call that customer onboarding, for example. And in that container, we can put all the events that can occur, and we can sequence them as we need them. We talk about we sequence them at runtime rather than at design time. So we don't design the flows, but we do put those process elements in there. The other one is that knowledge workers have context. People have information and they make decisions based on that. And based on that, they want to determine the routing. So, for example, a salesperson will know or may have read that there's an issue with a current prospect that is going through a customer onboarding process. They may have read in the paper, heard something on the TV news, and what they want to do is actually do a credit check right there and then. So instead of waiting for the prescriptive workflow that says you have to do it in step 6, we actually want to do it right now. So knowledge workers have context. What we want to do is enable them to make better decisions. So when we look at dynamic and all of those processes, so those elements, we will actually also introduce some of the analytics that we have. But right now, we just want to make sure that people have the option, based on the information that they have, to route it to a different place. So if we look at unstructured processes, one of the challenges that we have found is knowledge style work. If you use email or any one of those other ways and means of trying to manage it, that you actually don't have an audit trail of this knowledge style work. You only have audit trails of the discrete workflow-based work that you have, but none of this knowledge style, because the tools up to now haven't been able to support that. So if you've got an underlying workflow engine as the driver for your process management, then you can't cater for these knowledge style work. Customer service is a typical style of this, what we call knowledge style. So it depends on what the customer or what the feedback is, what the possible resolutions are, what the routing will be. So the routing is not always discrete. You can't say or predefine that we will always go down this route. It really depends on feedback, information, and all of that will determine the next step. So that is a case style approach. Ad hoc data entry. One of the customers that we have is a large funeral home service, and they receive a broad range of data as part of their onboarding process. Information can come in an unstructured way to them. So there's different information around who's going to pay the bill. There's different information around the actual funeral arrangement. There's different information around deceased details. There's a whole lot of different type of data, and we can't dictate the fashion or the sequence that we are actually going to get that information. So that is also a case style. So at any point in time, we can jump around and add information to that. The other one is social listening. So an example of that is we monitor Twitter feeds or something like that for reputation management, and based on that, depending on what the Twitter feed actually says, someone needs to read it, and then based on that, it needs to be routed for action to the appropriate place, and that is also an unstructured process, because it's really dependent on what the information, what the initial message was, and how we take it through the resolution process. Even inside that resolution process, there's multiple options depending on what the outcomes are. So those are typical unstructured processes that we find ourselves working in. If we look at a quick example of what we call a unstructured process in version 6, I'm just going to hand over the keyboard here quickly to Gavin. He's got the software, and I'll be talking on that. So I just want to pass it on to him. Okay. Double check that we can see the right screen. Great. So as you can see, in order to explain what unstructured processes look like, I just quickly want to touch on what a structured process typically looks like. So what we've got on the screen is our XMPro XM Designer. So this is where we build processes, and at the back you can see there's a Visio-based diagram, and that diagram has got structured customer onboarding. So you can see there's a discrete flow, and there's a specific path or routing that it has to step through. those are only 20% of processes that we have in an organization. If we look at a typical unstructured process, so the previous one was customer onboarding, and we took a very structured flow, very basic. In this instance, what we're looking at is an unstructured, what we call opportunity management. So, for example, we respond to tenders, RFPs, RFCs, all of those sort of things, RFQs. So we respond to those, and we see those all as opportunities. So this is a sales-based process, and what you'll see, there's a whole bunch of events. Now, from an XMPro point of view, we now refer to this canvas that you see as our process container, and we can add events to that. So there's a whole bunch of events that we can add. Those events are typically a process starts with something like start opportunity, but then there's a whole bunch of events. We can set up bid committees, there's technical reviews, there's the actual proposal presentation, there's project costing, there's conducting credit checks, there's margin approvals, all sorts of things. Right now, the credit check is at the end of the process. What Gavin's going to do, he's just going to move it. So as you'll see right now, credit check is just one of those options that will come through that you can, as part of the later stages of the actual process. What we're going to do is we're actually going to include, so we would like to dynamically, to the start process, we would dynamically like to add, and he's using our dynamic allocation logic, which we call DAL, and without drawing flow diagrams or anything like that, you'll see. So as you can see, the credit check just still sits there as an event, but if you refresh this, you'll see on the right-hand side, we now have credit check as an option so we've not had to do any workflow coding or set up a specific code for that. So this is opportunity management, and in this instance, I'm just going to put in a ABN number there, any number. Now there's a couple of business rules behind this thing that says if it's a new customer, and it's a new segment, and it's new technology, and the value is more than something, then it'll always have to go to a bid committee. It can't be done by the salespersons. You'll see right there, it doesn't mean that it has to go to the bid committee right now. You can set it to do that. It just means before this process will be completed, it will have to be seen by a bid committee. If we change some of the other parameters, so we make the value less, and we also say it's not a new technology and it's not a new customer, in this instance, you'll see that, I'll just make that a lesser amount. What you'll see is that it's not can't remember what the threshold was that we set in here. As you can see there, the threshold is probably about $5,000. So everything above $5,000 will have to go to a bid committee. He's going to put in some comments there. So on the right-hand side, the action items, those are actually the dynamic buttons that in XMPro version 6. What that allows you to do is dynamically have as many buttons as you need for a unstructured process. So if it's a structured process, it'll only have one button, and you can only go one or two routes. If it's dynamic with a dynamic allocation logic, we can actually expose all of those elements that were shown on the flow diagram. We can actually expose all of them. What Gavin's doing now is he's just adding some documents to this. So there's some opportunity documents that came in with that. So what he's going to do now is actually send it off for a credit check, because he has contextual information. He knows that he read something in the paper about this airline, the Blue Bean airline or whatever. So he's now going on to logging in as Mark Smith, who's the financial controller who actually does the credit check. So in his to-do list, under case, it's got a task, and in that task, in terms of function, a standard process functionality, we're not covering any of that in this webinar. If you want to understand how the routing, the options, the audit trials, the integration, all of that works, then please contact us or one of our partners and we can demonstrate that to you. So what Gavin's doing here, maybe just Gavin, just go back to the top of the screen so we can just want to explain. I just want to explain, this is the credit check form. So in that, it's brought in information from the previous screen. We've got a web service that does a currency conversion. Before we actually submit this to Dun & Bradstreet, we want to, so this web service goes off and uses a web-based service, and right now, as of today, we're getting 92 Australian cents for $1 US, which is not great for us exporting from Australia. And so instead, the $2,000 from a credit point of view is now only 1,800 that needs to be approved on our side. What you'll see is, because we've not reviewed it, that button shows not reviewed, so I can submit this and it'll trigger a different review process. If I do the credit check right now, so what it'll do, it'll use the web service, go to Dun & Bradstreet, come back, give it a credit score, and you'll see in terms of our business rules, this is now a positive review. So that dynamically changes. If you open the case file, the documents that were associated in the previous steps are all there, so you can see the documents that are now, they can be SharePoint based or they can be file based, so that's all stored in there. The positive review sort of leads me into, or the change of the button to positive review actually leads me into the next component of what XMPro does. So if we look at dynamic processes, so as you saw, that button dynamically changed. So based on the context or conditions, that button actually changed. So what does dynamic mean? Well, by dynamic we say that it's rules-based, event-driven actions. The example that you saw with a Visio diagram with all those activities that were not linked, those are all events. They're all discrete events. Each of those events have their own screen. They have their own data integration. They have their own rules, and we can dynamically or in an unstructured way sequence them when we need them. Another key part of it is that these dynamic processes utilize things like predictive analytics, process mining, and business intelligence to make it more goal-oriented. So essentially what it does, it provides agile, flexible processes that are still managed by a set of rules. So this is more a rules-based or rule engine approach with a whole bunch of events that can occur. And so we still work within rules. It's not just anyone do what they want, especially when you look at compliance, governance, those sort of things. So this rules framework that can dynamically adjust based on the events of the context of the process. Like you saw when we did the credit check, it immediately came back with the credit score, and based on the credit score, the button changed, and it actually now goes down a route for where there was a positive approval. The other element which we will demonstrate when we show you some dynamic processes is the ability to advise next best action using data mining and predictive analytics. All that means is we can go and look at the historical or previous processes and say, what did someone do with the same set of conditions? When they had the same set of conditions, what was the what actions were taken at that point in time? So it gives you guidance, and I need to stress it's guidance. It doesn't take over the workflow. It doesn't change you still have the ability to make the decision, and that is a key element of intelligent business operations. You provide the intelligence to people, but you still rely on them to make those decisions. You have the audit trails, so you can see what decisions were made, and that is actually what we use. We can mine that data, and we can actually use that as part of the ability to advise next best actions. You can also visualize process goals at each step to guide the work decisions. Now, those process goals can either be in the transaction, or they can be overarching for the overall process. So these are KPIs. Every process should have a KPI. It doesn't matter what you do. Even if you're doing remuneration adjustments across the organization, there are certain KPIs that need to be adhered to, whether it's sales, whether it's procurement, whether it's operations, it doesn't matter. Processes, and the best way of looking at that is actually if you look at a balanced scorecard. Balanced scorecard is built all around KPIs. It's all around the strategy of the organization. So that is typically something that we would like to show people when they are at a work step. We don't want them to go to an analytics dashboard. We want to embed some of those analytics widgets into the actual process so that they can see what it is or what the current context is, and they can make better business decisions. So when we look at dynamic processes, they can dynamically change based on events, as I described. They are also context aware, so it means if there's a change in either internal environment or external environment, that you can manage it, and it's got built-in predictive analytics. So if we look at dynamically, what do we mean by dynamically change on events? I just want to give you some examples. So for example, we have data rules, so it can change based on certain data rules. So we can check how are we doing against a budget, and when we get to 80% of our budget, we can introduce additional approvals or something like that. Or on a sales budget, as soon as we hit break-even point, we don't allow discounts anymore. Then we want to maximize profit. So the initial part is around budget is actually to get just to make our number from a break-even point of view, and then we want to change the rules, and then we want to maximize profit. So that is one way that a process can change. If you look at, there can be business rules. An example of that is a complex approval matrix. If you've got for example, a banking client with a complex approval structure for procurement, where they have 10 or 20,000 people that do procurement, and they have all these HR categories where people fit in, an A and a B and a C and whatever, and you may require that 2 A's and a B sign for a specific GL account. It's quite a complex approval matrix. The challenge that you have, and most of this can be done with some basic workflows. The challenge that you have is if that complex approval matrix changes every month, like it does in a bank, who have people that move around, leave, and new people that join, so that whole complex approval matrix, and with all their mergers and acquisitions and putting departments together and taking them apart, we have found that is a really, really hard thing to manage if you can't dynamically change the processes based on that. So that's one example where business rules have an impact on how you dynamically want to change it. And then lastly, you want to use social events to be able to change processes dynamically, or escalate or drive it to a different user. So for example, if I was an insurance company and I on Twitter put #carjacked help, I was hoping that someone would pick it up and action it. So and based on the fact that it is a distress word, it will actually elevate it, other than just saying XYZ insurance companies suck, which is a different problem from a social event. So yeah, there's a whole number of ways that you can actually dynamically change processes. So that just means if you combine that with unstructured, unstructured says we don't have to follow a specific path. Dynamic says based on context, based on things that I know, we will actually change. So when we look at context, so what happens if the exchange rate changes? You may want to, as soon as there's a exchange rate change, you may want to enforce a whole different set of rules and routing and logic on your procurement, sales, or whatever the processes are that are all impacted by exchange rate changes. One example is, say, and this was one that I read, a storm impact on insurance call center. As soon as there's a big storm, what you want to do is you want to reduce, or you want to streamline that process of getting claims through by just taking out a whole lot of approvals and complexity in the process. You still want to have some controls, but you just want to get that call center going without a big backlog building up in it. And then the other context-aware thing is, so who's doing the transaction? If it's the MD of the organization, it may have a completely different route, logic, business rules, and everything. So it needs to be context-aware around who the person is that's actually doing the transaction, and based on that, it'll prescribe certain rules, flows, and even data that it may or may not show them. So that is typically what context-aware means. When we look at built-in predictive analytics, it's really taking the investment that we've done in our BI and putting that into the process. Why look at BI separately, sort of a rear view mirror approach, and not put it into the actual process? So when someone's doing something, for example, and this is the example we're quickly going to show you, is when I do a approval for purchasing, I can actually put the graph out of SAP or Oracle or AX or whatever financial system it is that you use. We can actually put that graph into the process, so you know immediately whether you can approve it or not. You can add additional approval steps on a threshold. So when that graph approaches 80% of budget, we can introduce additional rules or change rules based on that, and we can advise next best actions based on this predictive analytics. There's an example, and in actual fact, I think one of the guys on the webinar at the moment actually works on that project, where from a university perspective, they get paid based on grants. So they get grants based on students that finish. And one of the things that you want to do, that you want to predict or want to find, is actually students that fall off or that are showing signs of not completing courses. So you want to look at, and there's such amount of data. As I said right at the start, people are actually overwhelmed by data. So what you want to do is take the attendance records, the library records, the canteen records, and all of those, collate that information and try and identify those students that are showing signs of that they will potentially drop off. Then you can action that and start processes to actively try and engage them in the process of getting them back in, so that you can get your grants at the end of the day. The one challenge that you have with that, at some point in time, the cost of trying to get that student back actually crosses over with the value of money that you're going to get. So from a business point of view, on your dashboard, you'd like to see, when do we stop doing this? It's a great approach. So it uses a lot of all this predictive analytics, and it can put it into the process. We can drive the process. We can try and get them through consultation and whatever mechanisms they use. But at some point in time, we also need to say, well, this is not worth it. So that is typically applications for this. There are some questions coming through for the webinar. I'll answer them at the end. So let's give you an example of a dynamic process in version 6 of iBOS. And I'm just going to once again hand over to Gavin, make him the presenter. So he's got keyboard and mouse. So as I was saying, we have a purchase requisition process. So you can see there's actually 3 ones open. That's he's logged in as Tim Clark, and Tim has got 3. He chose the first one, which was Keith Miller. So if you look at the history, you will see that Keith was looking to buy. So as you can see, XMPro puts the previous steps in line. So the form, so you can actually see what was ordered, $4,500 for a server rack. So we can just close the history. There's a whole lot of functionality, and once again, we can demonstrate that to you if you're interested in a separate presentation. So what you'll see, the graph that has come through actually draws the data from the financial system, so the ERP or whatever you're using. There's a budget of $22,000. We've spent $12,000 up to now. There's another $2,000 currently committed in another transaction sitting somewhere in the approval stage. And in this one, you'll see the requisition total corresponds with the graph element over there. So based on this, I can see that I will probably, there's a good chance of me approving this. But I would actually like to understand how am I doing but on my overall expense management. So if I look at my process goal, so the bottom graph, the budget goal is for that specific activity, for that specific event that we're doing. The top one is my process goals. So that will stretch over all, for that whole transaction, every single time you do an event, that graph will show. So in this instance, we can see, and you can customize these graphs. In the back end of XMPro, our designer, we have a chart wizard. You build these drag and drop with fancy graphics, so you don't have to worry on how to do that. In actual fact, you can embed the widgets from some of the BI tools out there. You can actually embed those widgets in there as well to give you that information. But in this instance, we can see that we're currently spending, our budget is $22,000, the budget is $17,000 on that, $17,000, and you can see our monthly expenditure. So I can see right now for the last 3 months, I haven't really spent as much as I have previously. I can also see by department in terms of the 3 GL codes that I am responsible for approvals. I can see my IT expenditure at the moment is the highest, on HR spend the lowest. So those are KPIs or process goals that I can now use to drive this process. Just one more thing that I want to do. I want to see what did other people do when they were in a similar position. So I can look at the next best action. And what the next best action does, you can put the checkbox anywhere that you want. But what you can do with the next best action, it'll actually say, out of the previous 200 instances of a similar condition, same GL code or whatever the case might be, what did most people do? So based on that, I can see that a good 70% of the time, people actually approved it based on the current conditions that we have right now. So you can use predictive analytics to drive that what it is that you're actually going to do. So that gives you sort of a view of what a dynamic process can look like. Obviously, you saw the button changing previously. You can add additional buttons as it goes. But what is really powerful is being able to advise and use the predictive approach and using the business intelligence that we have, and also visualizing the process goals. And it's all around making better business decisions. With all of this information, we're not taking the ability away from people to make a decision. We just give them as much information as they need to actually make good decisions. The last element that I'd like to talk about is social processes. So as you'll recall, we had unstructured processes, we had dynamic processes, and lastly, what makes intelligent business operations is actually to take some of the conversations that we have in and around business and to take the social conversations that are in or around the business and its transactions. What we mean by that is sometimes we want to talk about process improvement. For example, other instances we want to talk about a specific transaction, and we want to capture all of that information. The other thing that we want to do is we want to be around the business. So when we're in the business, or in the process itself, it is all around what happens inside that process or the transaction. around the business is by monitoring social channels, like what are people saying on Facebook, Twitter, all of those, and turn those tweets into tasks. There is a separate webinar that we did previously that goes into a lot of detail showing exactly how the social listener works and how you do reputation management with that. We also have some great information coming up around reputation management and how you can do it for your organization. But right now, we're just going to show you a very basic example of that. What you also want to do is, and that is so critical, is actually to capture the social collaboration as part of the audit trail or the decision trail. You don't just want the emails flying around the processes on the outside. You actually want those social collaborations to be part of the audit trail. So you want to be able to see what was said, why did we approve it, that we couldn't find in the previous workflow-based approach. So let's show you an example of that collaboration in version 6. Just quickly going to, and once again, I've got Gavin showing. So I'm now logged in as Keith Miller. And what he's going to do is under policy. So in this instance, there was a policy change process. Someone wanted to change a policy, and as part of that, so you can see in the history of that, you can see the history and time and date stamp. So this is the standard history, and you can drag and drop sort by people. So even with large volumes of information, it's quite easy to find transactions. What you can see, the actual icons differ. So those are traditional events or activity steps or process steps, and the one with the little orange components are two people collaborating. And in this instance, you'll see, so we had a complete new policy proposal form, then coordinate the policy proposal, and then afterwards, in that step, Tim actually started. Keith actually went back and said, Tim, there's stuff that we need to do. Now, as you can see, this is unstructured. So these are conversations that become part of the transaction. So when I look at the audit trail of the process, I can actually see the collaboration around discussions that also was part of this whole approach. So it's really a very powerful way of capturing those social interactions, and there's even time and date stamps, and all of those go into the full audit trail. So there's full time and date stamps. What is nice about this is we can put some BI over this and start looking at who are the social collaborators. Should we actually include them in the formal process or not? And those are really business decisions. There's some, social collaboration aspect, people can either be they can be influencers by providing information, or they can be silent approvers. You want to use your BI tools and actually go and have a look at that. The other thing that you can do with BI on unstructured processes, while Gavin's opening this up, what you can do with BI on unstructured processes is actually look at what is the real path that people follow, not the path that we thought they followed. But that's the other great thing with BI on top of unstructured processes. Lastly, I just want to touch on, so we have a Twitter feed, and that Twitter feed picked up #XMPro as a tag. So with our social listeners, Mantan said something that he's watching the webinar. Now, what you want to do with those, you want to turn tasks into tweets. Now, once again, this is dynamic and unstructured. So depending on what he wrote, we might want to send it either to customer service, to bookings. Now, the bookings was actually an example that we used with Qantas. So depending on what it is that he's saying, we actually have a whole bunch of possible actions that can come out of this, and we can drive that dynamically. So we can listen socially as well. And then lastly, I just want him to log out here. As you'll see from a social perspective, XMPro version 6 has also introduced the ability to log in using Facebook. As you can use your Gmail account, your Windows Live account, LinkedIn, Twitter, Yahoo, and also other business proprietary ones like SAP. So from a social perspective, processes are not limited to the enterprise anymore. It's on Facebook as well. So we'll be showing you our Facebook app in the not too distant future, and also show you how you can actually run processes inside the social world of Facebook. So I'm going to grab the screen back from Gavin. So what we've shown you with version 6 is that we can make better business decisions because we have context-based information. It can change dynamically. We show all this information on the screen. So we show all the business intelligence, predictive analytics, all of that on the screen, and it helps people to make better business decisions, which is a key challenge for business right now. It empowers these knowledge workers to do what they know best, but still within a governance framework that suits us. And it makes these business intelligence insights actionable. A lot of people have spent a lot of money on BI, and now we take those things that you learn out of that and actually turn those into actions. And it improves collaboration by harnessing the social interaction. That means we can capture those conversations that we have. It's all about its better business outcomes, so we can manage our KPIs. XMPro version 6 gives you better control of knowledge work. So you've got audit trials of that. It's a better experience for the knowledge workers because we're not forcing them down a specific route. We empower them to still make intelligent business decisions. And in the end, this all means a lower cost of business operations. Thank you very much. I see there's a couple of questions, so I'll just address this. There's a question around if the input from one business process is required as the input to another process, how is this supported in an unstructured process, or is this by definition that it is a structured sequential process? If the information, thanks, it's a great question. If the information from one process, from one activity is required in the other, it is you can still do that in a dynamic way. So you can. I'm just trying to think how to explain this from a and not having the software open in front of me to do that. XMPro has the ability that you can interrogate any previous activity from the one that you're in right now to interrogate what information it contains at that point in time. So even though I can route it unstructured, when this event that I'm in right now requires information that was captured in a previous event, I can interrogate that previous event from this one. So it does not imply that it's a structured sequential process, but you also need to look at this from a practical point of view when you design processes to say, well, if I'm going to have an event that requires information from a previous event, then I will need to make sure that the previous event happened prior to the one that I'm in right now. It may not be in a structured way. You still may do it in an unstructured way. So there may be multiple options of getting to the activity where I am right now. But if it does require information, then you will just need to make sure from a logical approach that initial one occurred. I hope that answers your question. If not, we can actually show you how it works. What you'll find with a lot of processes is actually that there's a hybrid model. So the 80-20, as I said right at the start, 20% of a process, 20% happens at the start, which is the sort of the structured, let's log a request, do a requisition, do something like that, and then it goes into the 80% of, well, let someone decide what the next action is, and then it may actually go back into a structured process in the end. So that in itself, because it becomes a hybrid, is by definition an unstructured process, even though it has structured elements built into it. So that's one way of doing it. Sequential processes are something where you predefine all the steps and you actually draw a flow. In an unstructured process, you can still have rules that determine sequencing, but but it means but you don't have to draw the arrow. So I hope that answers your question. If there are any more questions, please feel free to contact myself or any one of our partners, and we'd be happy to show you how we do this. Thank you for your time.